A chance encounter. Rebecca had always believed in the ordinary. She was a librarian in a small town, and she lived a quiet life. Her days were spent among dusty bookshelves, the soft murmur of pages turning, and the occasional conversation with patrons who sought her help. Yet, deep down, there was always a longing for something more, something extraordinary. She didn't know what that was, but she felt it stirring in her chest whenever she looked out the library's large windows at the ever-changing sky. It was on a cool autumn morning when Rebecca's life shifted. The library was unusually quiet that day, the kind of peaceful silence that allowed her to focus on the books that had been stacked high on her desk. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice him at first. Karl walked into the library with an ease that immediately caught her attention. Tall, with dark, unruly hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through her, he had an air of quiet confidence. Rebecca barely looked up, but something about him made her pause. She watched as he wandered through the aisles, his fingers brushing the spines of the books as though he were searching for something specific. He didn't approach her at first. Instead, he lingered near the shelves, reading the titles in hushed tones, as if each book held a secret. Rebecca had seen many patrons come and go, but this man, with his air of mystery, intrigued her more than she would have liked to admit. After what felt like an eternity, he finally made his way over to the front desk, where Rebecca was still seated. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice deep but warm. "I'm looking for something special." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, surprised by the directness of his request. "What kind of something special?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Karl smiled, a slow, almost knowing smile. "Something that makes me feel alive again. Something that stirs the soul." Rebecca couldn't help but chuckle. It was such a peculiar request, but there was something in the way he spoke that made it sound entirely genuine. "I think I have just the thing," she said, standing up. She led him to a section of the library filled with old, forgotten books. "Here are some novels that might do the trick." Karl looked at the titles with an appreciative glance, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "Do you recommend any in particular?" Rebecca thought for a moment, then pointed to a weathered copy of Wuthering Heights. "This one," she said. "It's about love and obsession. It's intense." Karl took the book from her, turning it over in his hands before looking back up at her. "I think this will do," he said with a smile. "Thank you." Rebecca returned his smile, but it lingered for a moment longer than usual. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her heart beat a little faster. She watched him walk away, feeling a strange sensation in her chest, as if something was beginning to stir. Growing connection. The days that followed were filled with subtle, chance encounters. Karl would return to the library, always coming in at different times, yet always finding a way to seek out Rebecca. They would talk briefly, but those conversations were always filled with layers of meaning. Books, life, and the little things that mattered most. Karl had moved to the town recently, seeking solace from the loss of his father, and Rebecca was one of the few people he had connected with. Their conversations were often quiet but rich, as they shared thoughts on poetry, philosophy, and dreams they had never spoken aloud. It was clear that there was an unspoken bond growing between them, one that neither could quite name, but both could feel. One evening, as the sun set and the library began to empty, Karl stayed behind, sitting by the window with a cup of tea. Rebecca was tidying up, and she couldn't help but steal glances at him, wondering what he was thinking. It wasn't until he spoke that she realized how lost she had become in her thoughts. "Rebecca," he said, his voice a soft whisper. "I've been thinking about you." Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it. "Oh? What about me?" He stood and walked over to her, his expression unreadable. "I can't explain it, but you feel like someone who understands without words, like we've known each other for longer than we have." Rebecca's cheeks flushed, and she quickly glanced down, unsure how to respond. She had never been one to entertain romantic notions, but the pull she felt toward Karl was undeniable. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "We've only known each other for a short time." Karl smiled again, and there was a gentleness in his gaze that made her breath catch in her throat. "It feels like more," he said simply. The confession. A few weeks later, the winter chill had begun to settle in. The library was quieter than usual, the long nights stretching out before them. Rebecca found herself thinking of Karl more and more, wondering when he would visit next. She was restless, caught between the comfort of her quiet life and the pull of the unknown. Karl arrived one late afternoon as the sky turned a deep shade of purple. He was different, more intense somehow, and his eyes held a depth that Rebecca couldn't quite place. She had prepared herself for their usual conversations, but today it felt like something more was at play. As she led him to the bookshelves, Karl stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. "Rebecca," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her heart racing. "What is it, Karl?" "I've been thinking about you. About us," he began, his voice low but steady. "I know this may sound crazy, but I feel like we're meant to be something more than just strangers. I've never felt this way before, and I can't ignore it any longer." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She had never expected Karl to feel this way, but now that he had said it, she couldn't deny the truth in his words. She had felt it too, the connection, the pull, the desire to be something more. "Karl," she whispered, unsure of how to continue. He stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her face. "I know we don't know what the future holds, but I want to take a chance with you. I want to explore this, whatever this is, together." Rebecca's heart swelled in her chest. She had spent her life avoiding anything that might disrupt her peaceful existence, but with Karl, she felt like she could let go of the fear and embrace something new. She stepped forward, her lips meeting his in a soft, tentative kiss that spoke volumes. It was a kiss filled with longing, with hope, and with the promise of something deeper. As they pulled away, Rebecca looked into his eyes and whispered, "I feel it too. I've been waiting for something like this." And just like that, the ordinary life she had known was gone. In its place was something far more beautiful, far more extraordinary. A love that had grown quietly, subtly, until it was undeniable. A love unfolds. Over the next few months, Rebecca and Karl's love blossomed in the small, quiet moments they shared. They took long walks together through the woods, their fingers intertwined, and spent evenings curled up by the fire, reading poetry and sharing dreams. It wasn't always easy. The scars from Karl's past and Rebecca's fear of change sometimes threatened to pull them apart. But with each challenge, their bond only grew stronger. One snowy evening, as they stood together by the window, watching the world outside transform into a winter wonderland, Karl turned to Rebecca with a look of tenderness in his eyes. "I love you, Rebecca," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Rebecca smiled, her heart full. "I love you too, Karl." And in that moment she knew that their love, quiet, steady, and filled with meaning, was the most extraordinary thing she had ever known. The end. This is just a condensed version of the story, but it captures the essence of Rebecca and Karl's love. If you'd like me to expand on any specific part or explore different details, feel free to let me know.